Asterisk, asterisk, they sold my daughter for gold. So I ended their dynasty. Asterisk, 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 Georgia, 1854 asterisk. I remember the bell before I remember her face that morning. A dull metal sound cutting through the air like a sentence already decided. The kind of sound that did not ask. It announced. My daughter was holding my hand when it rang. Her fingers were small, warm, trusting. She still believed the world, though cruel, was fair in the end. That belief had not yet been taken from her. Mine had. The master stood on the porch, reading names as if they were numbers carved into wood. Men gathered below, smelling of tobacco, sweat, and money. They laughed easily, comfortably. When he said her name, my daughter looked up at me and smiled. She thought she was being chosen for work. She thought work meant coming home at night. I did not smile back. They lifted her onto the block, not roughly, not kindly either, like she was already gone. Hands touched her arms and shoulders. A man asked if she cried at night. Another joked that fear could be trained out of her. I screamed then, not words, just sound. The master struck me so hard I tasted iron. He leaned close and whispered that debts did not care about love. Gold changed hands. Chains replaced my arms. They took her before sunset, south, far enough that hope could not follow. That night, the slave quarters were quiet in a way I had never known. No songs, no prayers. I sat against the wall and waited for tears. They never came. Something inside me sealed itself shut. From that moment on, I became invisible. I worked harder, spoke less, lowered my eyes. Masters mistake silence for obedience. They confuse stillness with emptiness. I listened. I learned which keys opened the storage rooms, which dogs slept deeply after feeding, which overseer drank himself blind on Sundays. I learned the master owed more than money. I learned neighbors hated him quietly. I learned secrets rot faster than flesh. Years passed. My back bent, my hands cracked, but my memory stayed sharp. The mistress was worse than him. She smiled while giving orders that hurt. She believed cruelty was discipline, and discipline was God's work. She punished slowly, publicly. I memorized her routines, her prayers, her nightly tea. Routine is arrogance wearing comfort. The plantation grew wealthy. New furniture, new guests. They celebrated prosperity built on graves. Then came the dinner, a long table. White cloth, silver shining under candlelight. They invited neighbors. Men who joked about auctions, women who pretended not to hear screams. I served calmly, no shaking hands, no hesitation. Revenge is not loud, it is precise. They laughed, they ate, they praised the food. The first man collapsed quietly. Confusion followed. Someone blamed the heat. Someone blamed illness. Then another fell. The master shouted orders no one obeyed. The mistress screamed my name for help. I stood in the doorway and watched. For the first time, they saw me. Fear changes faces quickly. Power drains faster than blood. Before dawn, the house was silent. I walked away barefoot. Not running, walking. The night air felt different when no one owned me. Freedom did not come like a sunrise. It came quietly, like breath returning after nearly drowning. The first days were the hardest. Not because of hunger or cold, but because my body kept waiting for orders. I moved at night, followed creaks. slept beneath trees whose names I did not know. Every sound carried memory. Every snapping branch sounded like chains. Faces followed me in my dreams, the auction block, the porch, the sound of gold striking wood. My daughter's voice came last, always last. I survived by listening. Farmers talked. Travelers bragged. News moved slowly, but it moved. They spoke of the plantation in hushed tones, of illness, of ruin. No one spoke my name. Weeks turned into months. I worked where questions were not asked. I learned new routines. Freedom was not relief. It was responsibility. Trust was the hardest thing to relearn. Sometimes I passed plantations at a distance and felt my body tighten. The past does not vanish. It waits. I began helping quietly, leaving food, leaving directions scratched into wood, small mercies. Years later, I heard my daughter's name spoken again, whispered by a woman from the far south. She said the girl had survived longer than expected, that she had been strong. That was all. It was enough. Time did what chains could not. It carried the story beyond me. Wars were whispered about. Men argued over freedom as if it were a theory, not a wound. People spoke of the ruined plantation as a cautionary tale. Some said disease took them. Others said God did. No one spoke of a mother. No one spoke of a child. That silence was intentional. I learned power survives by controlling stories, by choosing what is remembered and what is erased. So I carried the truth quietly. I met others like me. We recognized pain without introductions. Around low fires, stories slipped out, not details. Just feelings, loss, anger, endurance. As I aged, I understood something the masters never did. Ownership is fragile. It exists only while everyone agrees to believe in it. Fear sustains it. Memory destroys it. In my final years, I spoke my daughter's name aloud, often. She was not a number, not a debt, not property. She was a life. They sold my daughter believing they had erased us. They were wrong. Because as long as one voice remembers, as long as one story survives, their dynasty never truly does. And that is how this ends. Not with forgiveness, not with hatred, but with remembrance. I thought the story would end once I learned how to breathe without permission. I was wrong. Freedom does not close wounds. It gives them space to speak. As the years moved forward, I realized that survival carried its own weight. I could walk where I wanted, but memory followed closely behind. Not like a shadow, like a second heartbeat. I lived among people who had also escaped, though we rarely spoke of how. We understood each other through silence, through the way our eyes scanned every room, through the way our bodies stiffened at sudden sounds. I learned new skills, new names, new ways to disappear, but I never learned how to forget. Sometimes at night, I imagined my daughter grown. I wondered if she remembered my face, if she had learned to hide her fear the way I had, if she survived by becoming smaller or stronger. Those thoughts stayed with me longer than hunger ever did. I began to notice something else as time passed. Stories, they traveled faster than people, whispered in kitchens, murmured at crossroads, carried by those who had nothing but memory. They spoke of plantations failing, of masters losing control, of systems cracking quietly. No one called it revenge. They called it misfortune, but misfortune has patterns. I realized then that my story was not alone. It was part of something larger, a slow unraveling. I met a woman once who had lost 3 children to 3 different auctions. She did not cry when she told me. She spoke as if tears had already finished their work. She said something I never forgot. "They thought selling us broke us," she said. "But it taught us how to endure. Endurance is not passive. It is active resistance stretched across time." I began helping more openly then, guiding, warning, listening. I never carried weapons. I carried knowledge. Which roads were watched, which barns were safe, which people spoke kindness but meant profit. Information saves lives more quietly than force ever could. Years later, when talk of war reached us, I felt no celebration. Freedom, spoken aloud by powerful men, sounded fragile, conditional. I had learned long ago that freedom given could be taken back. Only freedom claimed stays. When the world finally shifted, when laws changed and chains fell publicly, I did not cheer. I watched. I watched people learn how to exist without power over others. Some failed. Some adapted. I wondered what my daughter would have thought, if she would have believed it was real. In my final years, I stopped running. I chose one place to stay. There, I told my story, not loudly, not often, but truthfully. I spoke her name whenever I could. I made sure it lived outside my memory. Because names are the first thing history tries to erase. I never learned her fate completely, but I learned something just as important. They did not win, not because I survived, not because a plantation fell, but because memory outlived ownership, because stories traveled farther than chains ever could, and because somewhere, someone listening would understand that this was never just about one mother or one child. It was about a system that believed suffering could be managed, controlled, forgotten. It was wrong. And as long as this story is told, as long as someone hears it and remembers, the silence they depended on will never return.